Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, February 10th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about foliar sprays, comparing farming to gambling, and how the funding freeze is still affecting farmers. So let's do it. All right, so I want to open up today's show with a quick story. In 2017, I was at a farmer's market in Asheville, North Carolina, talking to a farmer I knew there in the area named Joe Evans at his booth. While I was there, a guy came into that booth and just quietly started loading up on produce and putting it into a box. And I had told Joe we were going to eat at a restaurant called Cucina 24 that night. And Joe was like, oh, well, you should meet this guy, pointing to the man loading up on his produce. This is Brian. He's the chef. We shook hands and talked for a second, and then he went about his shopping. Given that it wasn't that common to see a chef at the farmer's market, I started to really look forward to our meal. That night, Hannah and I had an incredible dinner with all sorts of interesting ingredients, from bitter greens to edible flowers, and every dish beamed with local ingredients on notably locally crafted plates and bowls. It was incredible. It was an incredible, unmitigated synthesis of Western North Carolina, orchestrated by a chef who clearly understood how and why to work with farmers. Tragically, that chef, Brian Canapelli, passed away last Thursday. It would be hard to overstate how above and beyond Brian went to support the local farmers of the area, and he will be missed dearly. I've only met and seen a handful of chefs like Brian in my time. His dedication to local farmers was unrivaled. So we're sending our love to his friends and family and to the farming and culinary community in Asheville who are still reeling from the floods. We know you all are heartbroken. Now, I did not know Brian beyond meeting him that day, but he was renowned, and I could see his effect in the local farming community there in Asheville every time we went back. He was a real one. I'll put a link for how to show some support in the show notes. Rest in peace, Jeff. All right, well, it's Monday, and we are now roughly 36% of our way through the month of February, or we only have 64% of the month of February left until March, which means almost nothing, except that March is like the traffic light turning from blinking red to blinking yellow. March is still a very cold month here, but it can also be profoundly nice and warm. We can often get our biggest snowfalls in March because the temperatures tend to linger closer to that freezing point, which is snow's jam. And we can have large rains, tornadic activity. Oh, that's a fun word. I don't say that one very often. Tornadic activity, or warm, dry spells that enable farmers to get some land worked up. It's the proceed with caution month, because you don't want to plant too much, but it is also indeed a proceed month because you don't want to fall behind. But February is the blinking red light of months that signals coming to a full stop before proceeding slowly and cautiously and coming to another full stop. It was hoodie weather yesterday. Tomorrow, a possible ice storm. Yeah, stop and start. I used to hate the slow windup of the season, but I've kind of grown to embrace the stop and start nature of February, and then the slow roll of March. I like getting going and then being forced to pull back a little bit, read a little bit, watch a show with Hannah, Severance for the win, play with the boys, then work hard for a day and repeat. It's a nice natural ease out of the restful season and into the workful season. I haven't always been so open to the idea. I used to get incredibly antsy when we get a warm, dry spell in February. I mean, I still kind of do, but I remember one year I was determined to get our chard and kale started early because I had chefs over the years begging for spring greens in the late winter every year. We didn't have the infrastructure at the time, but I put together some hoops and old high tunnel plastic to build a small low tunnel for them. I babied the transplants into existence in our greenhouse, taking them in every night to ensure they survived through a cold January and February. Then I transplanted them in late February, carefully manipulating them into the mulched gardens and recovering them in the low tunnel, only to lose them the next week to an intense cold snap. Clearly, I've not always been very patient. I'm still not always very patient. See the episode last week where I knocked over a tray of starts by yanking on a hose. But this business does not concern itself with one's patience or lack thereof. A lot of times farming gets equated to gambling because you are taking risks almost every time you plant something. A risk that the weather will water it and not kill it, a risk that a pest won't eat it, a disease won't devour it, the customer will still want it. And sometimes I think that the comparison to gambling is overblown, but there are things about professional gamblers that I think farmers can learn from. Now, I'm not promotional of gambling, and I am frankly terrible at it when I try it, but professional gambling does exist, and in order to exist, they have to know their crafts really well. They study their games, practice them, not to borrow a line from the movie Rounders, but there is a reason that the poker championships are always the same people year after year. It's not that they're lucky, it's that they know their game very well and they're very good at it. Professional gamblers, sports, races, poker, whatever it may be, have to manage their finances with extreme precision and discipline, guided by logic and not emotions. And that same thing applies to farmers. We have to pick and choose our risks wisely, control for what we can, and treat it like a serious job, even if sometimes it just feels like gambling. But when gambling is your job, you have to treat it like a job, or it's just wasting money. Anyway, as they say in gambling, you got to know when to play and know when to stay away. In farming, in my climate, nothing exemplifies that challenge more than the late winter. So let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the risks and rewards of foliar sprays. BRB.
Since I was a child, when I was young and wild, nobody could ever tell me there was nothing to overwhelm me.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by GrowSmart. Curious if your soil will be ready for planting this spring? GrowSmart can help you find out with their at-home soil tests. They'll ship it right to your door. Just send it back with your prepaid shipping and you'll have your lab results in just 2 business days. Their reports are simple with tailored seasonal recommendations for fertilizers and amendments. Order now at growsmart.com and use the code DAILY for 10% off. That's DAILY. Begin your soil prep now for a great spring with GrowSmart. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions now. Today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Bondegard, and I should note Little Eric, hi Little Eric, who asks, quote, what are your thoughts/practices around foliar applications, end quote. Okay, thank you. So this is a biggie and a fun one. First, for the uninitiated, foliar sprays are specially made solutions that are sprayed onto plants to address deficiencies in nutrients, help with transplant shock or general recovery from things like hail or pest damage, or to simply boost the microbial properties of the plant or communities of the plant. They can be specially designed nutrient applications dissolved in water, or they can be simple compost teas or extracts. And generally speaking, I'm fine with them, with foliar sprays, but I don't think foliar sprays are always necessary or always the best use of time or always the safest thing to do. First, let's talk about safety because it's clearly the most exciting part of this topic. There are 2 main things I think about with safety as it pertains to foliar sprays, especially less controllable ones like compost teas and extracts, but it could be any spray. Where there is moisture on edible things, there is a risk of contamination. With vegetables, food safety is paramount, and spraying an unverified liquid onto edible parts of plants could potentially lead to transplanting food pathogens. When we do spray foliar applications, and I'm talking organically approved ones, which is very rarely anymore, we do not spray on any edible parts of the plants ourselves, no fruit, no edible leaves, only foliage before fruit set or crops that won't be eaten raw like potatoes, popcorn, sweet potato leaves, cover crops when I have a little extra nerdy minute, that sort of stuff. Another safety issue is burn. If you spray at the wrong time or with too nitrogenous of a spray, for instance, the leaves can get burned. Foliar sprays should generally be done in the morning and evening. Sometimes I hear people recommend day sprays, but the risk of burn is to me, not totally worth it. Plus the stomata of the plants that release moisture to cool the plant off and pull nutrients up through the roots are hard at work during the day. Cooling the plant off, no need to make their jobs any harder. In terms of efficiency, walking around spraying stuff is also just not very efficient. It's just not. It can be fun, sure. I actually enjoy it sometimes, but there are better uses of time, like in the upfront soil management in particular. Moreover, the risk of creating a toxicity is there as well. Boron is a really important nutrient that can be applied through foliar sprays, but it is also very easy to create toxicity with boron as well. So it's got to be done right and done sparingly. Personally, I think a better use of time is designing a fertigation system that would deliver nitrogen and other amendments to the roots rather than walking or riding around and spraying something. Now, foliar sprays can be somewhat effective, like I said, at addressing micronutrient deficiencies once identified. This is especially true in soils where those micronutrients don't like to be released as easily. My understanding is that pH can have a major effect on the release of certain nutrients like manganese, so perhaps that is a situation where a foliar spray could come in handy or actually be like a lifesaver for some crops. But of course, keep in mind that I'm not an agronomist. I'm a soccer coach. There's a difference. So I would definitely talk to an agronomist before applying any foliar sprays like that. And if you're certified organic, you have to prove the deficiency before you can apply the foliar spray. An important note. Also, not every species is equally suited for foliar sprays. For instance, younger plants and plants in high tunnels have a thinner membrane and can often take up foliar sprays better than more mature plants, again, depending on the species, and it's only a temporary solution. In other words, sprays won't fix a deficiency in your soil if you just fix it with a single crop through a foliar spray. Does that make sense? Like fixing it in that crop doesn't fix it on your farm. I do like spraying cover crops with foliar sprays sometimes because I like to think that since I'm leaving that crop there, I'm basically just going to kill it and leave it on the soil. Perhaps I'm balancing the soil a little better that way, but I have nothing to back that up scientifically. And as I always say, just because something makes sense does not mean it makes science. There is nothing common about common sense because no two people have the same sense. Anyway, so yes, plants can take up some nutrients, especially micronutrients, through their leaves, but that doesn't mean every plant, and it doesn't mean it's the most efficient or effective means of fertilizing, and it doesn't mean it will solve every problem entirely. Now, I'm mostly talking annual plants here. Perennial plants are a somewhat different topic, so I'll leave that for another time. Treating fruit trees, treating berries, those sorts of things. Kind of a different thing. So foliar sprays are fine. They may work for you. I know many people who swear by them, but just be mindful of the risks and find ways to make them efficient and work with an agronomist if you can. Personally, I prefer inoculating the transplants in the greenhouse before they go out into the field and then making sure the beds are well taken care of before planting. Walking around spraying stuff is enjoyable sometimes, like I said, but a little bit too time consuming for me most of the time. But great question. And I expect some interesting feedback on that. Which you can do in the comments section. Anyway, let me know your thoughts as always. And up next, as a wise TikToker once put it, just give me my money, says the farming world. Be right back.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show.
All right, so I spent much of this weekend trying to understand the size and scope of the funding freeze on farmers and farm organizations here in the US, like you do. Generally, I like to use this show to discuss news as it pertains to small farms where I can, but this particular topic has been something I've held off on because I just assumed surely this was not going to persist. Well, weeks later, it persists. So let's talk about it. So to back up, here's what happened. On January 27th, President Trump issued an order freezing all federal grants and loans, which included those for agriculture. On the 28th, the federal judge temporarily blocked this order on the merit that it is illegal for the president to freeze funding that has been allocated by Congress. That's in the Constitution. However, although the order was blocked, many funding freezes have persisted as the USDA and others are being asked to review and eliminate spending for contracts that include all, and I'm summarizing, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEI or DEIA, and quote-unquote environmental justice, initiative plans, actions, contract grants, etc. To be clear, terms like DEIA and environmental justice describe basically every ag initiative and grant because the language around them is, environmental in nature and also trying to encourage historically underserved farmers and ranchers. That is to say, these programs try to encourage more veteran farmers, beginning farmers, and socially disadvantaged farmers, etc., to farm. Because they should farm. We need more farmers, and farmers need help, period. Anyway, effectively, this means that a ton of funding is still locked up as the contracts and grants are reviewed, which includes funding for many farm projects and farm supporting organizations. Millions upon millions of dollars worth of direct payments are not currently accessible as I record this at 6:53 a.m. on February 10th, some of which are cost share and reimbursement contracts, meaning farmers are in the middle of a project or finished with a project that came out of their pockets with contractual guarantees from the government for some amount of reimbursement that has not been issued and now may never be issued. Put another way, farmers were told they will be funded and given the green light to start certain expensive projects, and then have been at least temporarily denied the money to cover said projects. Or they put the project in their budget, and now they don't know if they're going to be covered for that project. That is some next level promise breaking. To be sure, often these are projects farmers could not have done without the support, or at least not as fast. Farms are expensive and capital can be really difficult to come across. And these are projects that will benefit many people, not just the farms and the farmers, but their communities and rural economies, future farmers, especially in the case of research grants and so on. Moreover, to be clear, I'm not just talking about small farms. That's what I'm plugged into, so obviously that's what I know the most about, but it's farms of all scales being affected. The Iowa Soybean Association complained that they are, quote, contractually owed $11 million for practices implemented in 2024, end quote. Rob LaRue, president of the National Farmers Union, told the Senate Agriculture Committee on February 5th that he was hearing from farmers all over the country who were not receiving expected payments, among other examples of bigger farmers being affected. On the smaller farmer side, I put out a call to farmers on Instagram who have been affected and heard from roughly 24 growers in 24 hours whose contracts have either been canceled or are in limbo. One farmer wrote, quote, our EQIP, an NRCS grant contract to install 2 tunnels, is on hold. Our site visit for irrigation design and composting facility are also on pause at the moment. Another grant through the Virginia Department of Ag to construct an on-farm store is also on hold because of the USDA freeze. It's been such a sucker punch. End quote. I use this quote because some version of it was a pretty common response. I heard from multiple farmers about frozen EQIP funding in some states, Western SARE grants, Inflation Reduction Act, IRA funding, climate smart funding, funding for food banks to buy local food for farms that rely on those, organic market development grants, the farmers market promotion program. I heard from farmers markets who are having trouble funding themselves right now. REAP funding, which is funding for renewable energy, and more. There were several that came in after I did the notes for this. And Montana, Maryland, Kentucky, Louisiana, Virginia, and many others, though I will say that some states, some of these were available in some states and not available in others. It didn't seem to be clear why. The TOP, TOPP mentorship program came up a few times as well, and that is one Hannah and I personally are a part of that is in limbo, and it's not entirely unlikely that it could be canceled. A project that helps farms transition to organic agriculture, which is important. There are important research grants locked up as well. It's just an unnecessary, disorganized, reprehensible mess that could have far-reaching effects. Like I always say, in farming, you are always working at least a few months in the future, if not a few years, so impacts now will be felt for a long time. Worse, the impacts, especially if they persist and leave farmers on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars, could shutter farms. Policy changes enacted for future programs are one thing, and they're expected with new administrations, but breaking existing contracts for political ideologies is just stunning. No other way to put that. Now, there is hope that once the new Ag Secretary is put in place, that the funds will be released. I mean, to be clear, Brooke Rollins could have already been confirmed as the Ag Secretary by the time this podcast goes up, in which case my hope is that all of the promised funding will be immediately reinstated and farmers and farm organizations will receive their contractually guaranteed funding without delay. But it is also possible that the reviews of these contracts will continue, locking up millions of dollars and hurting farmers. To be sure, if this continues, especially when coupled with things like tariffs, trust will be smashed, if it isn't already. So that's what's up with government funding and farms. Super fun stuff. I feel like I've talked for like an hour now, so it's your turn. I'd be curious to hear from any of you who are facing funding issues right now from this, maybe not even in farming. I've heard from lots of people who are not farmers who are facing funding issues. If you are a farmer or if you find this sort of overreach abhorrent, as many farmers do, this would be a great time to let your representatives know about it. They'd love to hear from you. Also your parents. You should probably also call your parents. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up there. But before we go, I want to give one last shout out to the folks at Rimmel Greenhouses for making this possible. Whether you're growing tomatoes for market or flowers in the spring or vegetables for your family, growing in a high tunnel protected from the weather provides the right environment for a harvest you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are strong, durable, and easy to assemble, offering the quality you need to grow productively year-round. The team of experts at Rimmel Greenhouse Systems will be your trusted partners to ensure you get exceptional value from your greenhouse or high tunnel investment. Visit Rimmel.com today to get growing Big thanks to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Brighton and UK for their victories this weekend. Woo woo. Much more fun than last weekend. Unwhoop on that one. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers for their support. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Cedric Reed, Jennifer Clark, and Lando Garner. I love that one. Lando Garner is fun to say. So I think this novel, this particular one, is about a trio of kids who want to be in the school play. So they sign up to be in the school play, and they're just, you know, they like acting and it's a musical, so they're very excited. And it turns out that it's actually Finding Nemo, the musical, but the director, bit of a quirky character, really wants to do the entire thing in an aquarium. And which is complicated with musicals, but it actually works pretty well. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow. Bye.